Fantastic. And yeah, and Lorenzo, I will hand over to you.
Brilliant.
To you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Laura. Good afternoon, everybody. As Laura says, something like 40-ish minutes of presentation, but this is not a presentation of facts and figures. It's not a presentation of the outcome of a research report. It's absolutely 40 minutes worth of hopefully thought provocation, which is why I'm going to limit it to around 40 minutes, because I hope the point of the round table is to discuss some of the things that I raise, maybe question some of the validity of the things that are raised, and think whether or not either it's applicable to your business or it's applicable to the whole safety and health industry, and maybe even what we want to do as a group to take forward the issue. But it would be absolutely remiss of me, mostly because I'm sitting in our head office in Holborn in London, to not mention Arriva and who on earth they are. So first apology of the session comes now. You're going to get very bored of Arriva Blue. The background of this slide is our dirty blue corporate colour. Arriva, if you don't know, is wholly owned by Deutsche Bahn, the German railway, and effectively we operate passenger transport for Deutsche Bahn outside of Germany. So we're in 14 different European countries, and now I mean the geographical region Europe, as both the UK, which is about 50% of our business, and Serbia are currently not part of the European Union. 54,000 colleagues, and I'd love to say we still do 2.4 billion passenger journeys, but that's a 2019 pre-COVID stat. That the world has fallen out of the passenger transport market at the moment, as lots and lots of people are either hybrid working or frankly are too scared to come back to public transport. For those of you that are shying away from public transport, it has never been cleaner or safer. So by all means, please don't lick the poles. It's not a great idea, but please come back to public transportation. And as Laura hinted at, we are an amazingly male-dominated organisation. We operate about 1 in 5 buses in London, and our driver gender ratio in London is 97% male, 3% female. So we are staggeringly male organisation. As a result of that, you can see on that slide, we play with lots of transport toys, so not just buses and trains, but water buses in 3 countries, ambulances in the UK, and we operate car share schemes and bicycle schemes in a number of countries as well. So that's the advert for Arriva out the way. So my employer is happy for me to carry on chatting to you. And what are we going to talk about today? Effectively, I'm going to drop a few hints at we're letting women workers down in the area of chemicals, in their physical ergonomic safety, and something around psychosocial risks as well. I hope I'm going to give you some examples of where male-dominated lawmakers have disadvantaged through very benevolent philosophies around paternalism, and we need to recognise more than ever the burden of unpaid work risks. But as I said to you at the outset, this is to provoke your thoughts rather than I'm presenting my PhD thesis. Or put another way, we're going to talk about sex, senators, stress, servants, safety, sticks and shooters. And you cannot imagine how long it took me to find only S's to capture the subtitle of the presentation today. So really what we need to do is we need to start off at, are things constant in the world? Because if we can't get constant, reliable data, we're already starting from a false premise. So anything that happens in the medical world, because we all watch Holby City, is absolutely standard, can be resolved within an hour, and never deviates. Well, let's have a little think about that, and let's measure somebody's blood pressure. And blood pressure is measured sometimes standing up, and sometimes sitting down, and sometimes even lying down. And that makes complete sense for the medics when you think sometimes Lorenzo is 6'2", and when he lies down, he's probably only a foot tall. So the pressure my heart needs to exert on my circulatory system to lift blood about a foot upwards when I'm lying down is completely different from the pressure we need when it's standing up. So blood pressure isn't constant. Height, well, height's constant, except it isn't. I'm 6'2" first thing in the morning, but I'm probably 6'1"-ish at the end of the day, because I've been stood up and gravity has compressed my spine somewhat. And as I age, as my discs start to dry out, I'm going to be shorter in my 60s than I was in my 40s. So right height isn't standard. Why on earth are we talking about medical measurements in health and safety, thought provocation, roundtable? Well, here we're going to talk about women's health for a moment, and this is the root of the first challenge. So women change every month. They have a menstrual cycle, and it means that the chemistry in their body is different, their hormonal levels is different, and that is a real pain to researchers, because they change, and they change every 4 weeks or so based on their cycle. And change in a measurement research study is annoying. So typically, in setting things like chemical exposure limits in our world, has been set using male data from male subjects, because men are consistently chemically and hormonally more stable than normal healthy women. And we'll come back to that as the presentation goes on. But then it's even wider than that in the world of health and safety. And although that is a generic toilet sign taken from stock images, it's to point out that being male or female biologically, so your sex is either man or woman, is not the same anymore as your gender, because there are multiple variations of gender. And many people have the opportunity to change their gender and change all of the documentation that supports their gender from their birth certificate onwards. And supported by our HR colleagues, a man who has transitioned to be a woman is a woman. But even more importantly, and we go back to the menstrual cycle third image there, a woman who has transitioned to being a man is a man. And we must treat them as men in the workplace until we get back to the cellular level and think about the biology. They are still biologically a woman. So here is the first minefield for health and safety practitioners when we're thinking about protecting people chemically. If there's a difference between the chemistry of a woman and the chemistry of a man, even though a biologically born woman is now a man and must be treated as a man, what are the health and safety community going to do about how we approach protecting them as a biological woman? And I think nobody's got the answer to that yet. What do I mean, and how does it work? Well, let's have a look. The chart is just an example of the difference of body fat ranges. But if you look at the text on the right-hand side, the normal male body fat range for a man aged 20 to 39 is between 8 and 20%. The normal female body fat range for the same age group starts at 2% higher than the top of the male range and goes up to 33%. So women, pound for pound, kilo for kilo, have a higher fat percentage, typically speaking, at the population level than a man. So why does that matter? It matters when you have fat-soluble toxins in your workplace. So things like heavy metals such as lead in petrol, pesticides, some food additives, mercury, plastics, other dangerous substances. I'll give you a really good example in my industry, cannabis. Cannabis is a fat-soluble drug of misuse. Because it's fat-soluble, it's stored in a woman's body for longer than it is stored in a man's body. So why do we have the same testing cutoff levels for men and for women? Or if we take it into ordinary, inverted commas, ordinary dangerous substance management, why do we use male exposure limits for fat-soluble toxins on our women worker population? Because setting an exposure limit through research is difficult to use women's subjects. You use male subjects because they're nice and consistent. But a fat-soluble chemical will be stored for longer and therefore doing more damage in a female higher body fat percentage on average at the population level than a man. So why do we not have sex differentiated exposure limits for fat soluble toxins, for example? So first thing for us to consider and maybe debate in the roundtable element later on. But it doesn't stop at the chemical level. Let's just look and protect the whole organism, the whole woman. And this is the sticks and shooters bit in the subtitle of the presentation. For those of you that don't recognise the image, this is the British Army in the 1970s in Northern Ireland. I suspect there's nobody on the call that doesn't recall late 60s into the 80s, early 90s, the troubles in Northern Ireland, when the British Army originally went to Northern Ireland to support the police in what you can only call civil unrest in that part of the UK. It very quickly became apparent that there would be a PR win if the IRA managed to kill a woman soldier. So in order to protect the women soldiers, and the picture is the evidence, they went into normal patrols with their male colleagues without armament. They went unarmed. And while that put them at a disadvantage, this was, and I kid you not, compensated for by requiring them to wear a skirt. The idea was any self-respecting righteous terrorist would not select a woman wearing a skirt to be shot. And that was the protection for a female soldier. Of course, that didn't go down terribly well. And time in the early 70s proved that women soldiers were at a disadvantage and they were required to be armed. And that makes complete sense to you. And you can see the parity in giving work equipment of a similar nature to a soldier, irrespective of their gender. However, the army absolutely clung to the idea that we should differentiate between, in the daytime, what you could see, and in the nighttime, the silhouette of male and female soldiers. So female soldiers in Northern Ireland, recognising that they didn't have parity with their armed male colleagues, were armed with a stick. So they were given effectively a long police truncheon to give them parity to the rifle that their male colleagues were wearing. And at the same time as that happening, they were encouraged to carry out all the duties of their male colleagues. Now that is absolutely staggering. And if you look at the image archive of the way the British Army treated women soldiers in the 1970s, there are multiple pictures of the women soldier being protected by a skirt. And that is truly staggering. However, hang on to introducing parity because it also introduces unintended consequences. So the image on the screen now is an Italian paratrooper. She's a woman and she is in Turin and she is providing security for the Italian Olympics team. And she's carrying exactly the same rifle as her male colleagues. Now, this is not uniquely down to gender, but this is down to all of the work equipment that you've selected over time that says ergonomic. And what they mean is the handle on it has got some spurious connection to a grip, and it's some middle of the road 4 indentations to allow you to grip with your closed hands. That an ergonomic solution does not make. And here is a female, shorter, smaller paratrooper carrying the standard sized weapon. So all soldiers, irrespective of their gender, who are outliers, so the very tall and the very short, will be disadvantaged by the single rifle. So should we have multiple sized rifles to make them better for different sized soldiers? Where on earth does that fit into our world? There are 5 standard mouse sizes. How many mouse sizes does your IT department make available to your office workers? That I could almost guarantee it's size number 3, the middle of the road size. Almost guarantee, because it captures most people. Well, what are we doing about the particularly small-handed and the particularly large-handed? And I just use the example of a soldier with a weapon to illustrate it. But it's not restricted to weapons. Here we are with the fine Essex Constabulary. 2 police officers, you can see one is gendered female, one is gendered male, and the height and body size difference is enormous. And they're wearing, broadly speaking, although there is a small, medium, large, broadly speaking, they're wearing the same body armour. Now, why is body armour a problem? and this is no disrespect to female colleagues on the call, women have a different upper body shape to most men, but not exclusively. There are a number of men that have large chest, moobs in the colloquial term, but they're wearing designed, flat-chested body armour of considerable weight. And there is some evidence that the pressure that is exerted on a breast raises the risk of breast cell changes, and you can only have so many breast cell changes before you have an errant breast cell change and you have a mutation that anybody else in the press would call breast cancer. So in the Metropolitan Police, a good number of years ago, there was a female police officer who originally was described by the TUC as having a mastectomy as a result of wearing her body armour. Subsequent investigation proves actually she felt so uncomfortable because of the size of her breasts, she had breast reduction surgery rather than a mastectomy. But even so, this was a woman worker who felt so disadvantaged by her PPE, she went and had surgery to make her fit the PPE. In my industry, we on the railway wear high visibility clothing, and if you wear a sleeveless vest, the vest must have Velcro at the shoulders and at the seams underneath your arms. So effectively there's a left front, a right front and a back piece all separated by Velcro. And the idea is quite a sensible one. If you become entangled in a moving train, your high visibility clothing rips and you're not dragged along with the train. As always, you can only get this clothing in small, medium and large. And we have within our industry, and I use the language advisedly, caught some of our women workers sewing the seams at the top and the seams down the side up to make a tailored piece of high visibility clothing that fits. Well, that's entirely against the rail industry standard for having a break apartable piece of high visibility clothing. We have even caught female safety advisors doing the same thing, because tailored, small hips, wider upper chest, high visibility clothing for the rail industry is not available. So they are increasing their risk by changing their own PPE. But don't worry, female police officers and male police officers with moobs, contoured body armour has now come onto the market. So it allows for the shape of the breast without putting undue pressure, and the feelings of discomfort, which may lead to bruising, which may lead to cell changes, which ultimately theoretically could lead to breast cancer, is mitigated somewhat. However, our friends in procurement have scored an unintended consequence blinder. Because it takes more Kevlar or whatever it is, the protective component in the body armour, to make the shape, they've increased the size of the gap for the arm, so there is more in the armpit space than in the flat-fronted body armour. Why does that matter? It matters a lot if somebody's coming towards you with a knife and they're able to stab you under your arm and close to your heart, theoretically, rather than stab you directly in the front. So there are lots and lots of changes and well-meaning consequences that perhaps haven't been fully thought out or haven't fully had a safety professional from the very concept stage of any of these changes. So women soldiers originally disadvantaged in Northern Ireland, potentially disadvantaged alongside their smaller male colleagues with standard single issue size weapons. Flat-fronted body armour, a little dated now because contoured exists, but contoured has introduced the new heightened risk of underarm stabbing. So in the world of PPE, it's really quite exciting. If you go to one of your PPE suppliers, they will tell you we have a female range of safety wear. Very often that's in the shoe boot arena, and very often they've changed the colour of the stitching and changed the colour of the lace. And I think the right word is a style. The style, which is the wooden former that you make the shoe with, is still male. And the shape of a woman's foot is different from the shape of a male foot. The length of the typical female toenail is longer than the length of a female male toenail. So more toenails lift, there's more bruising, more damage, which leads to more non-compliance, because the toe box has not been designed specifically for women. Why are we not calling this out as an industry and requiring proper protection? Well, maybe, just maybe, we have a legislature at the European level that isn't always thinking about the woman worker. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Lead industry, 1970s, very equally assessed the dangers for both men and women. There were no significant differences between the two, and we all know there's a detrimental effect of working with lead on fertility, and there's also a negative effect on the fetus. But let's just nip back to the detrimental effect on fertility. I haven't said on ovaries, eggs, and women's fertility. I've said all fertility. So there is an equal danger for both men and women fertility, but we elected to exclude women of a childbearing age from that industry. Why didn't we exclude men who may want to have children from that industry? So we felt able to protect men sufficiently to mitigate the risk, but we were overly paternally protective of the woman and decided to exclude them from the industry. How fascinating. But let's bring it a little bit up to date and let's look at the six-pack. At the origins of the six-pack, it made complete sense that if you were at work, you would be covered by the requirements of the six-pack. And that included people working in the domestic setting. Very quickly, the Council of Ministers said, no. Au pairs, nannies, domestic cleaners, domestic carers, they'll be working under the guardianship of a benevolent family, a paternal head of the household, which of course would be a man, and excluded them at the Council of Ministers stage, not at the first reading, from the six-pack. How is that possible in the modern world? So, and there are two flags called out there. Germany and the Netherlands specifically said, that's crazy. Of course, domestic work carries the same chemical, physical, violence, sexual harassment risk as if somebody was in a typical non-domestic workplace. But the Council of Ministers as a whole, with those two exceptions, decided it didn't and excluded them. Those risks effectively disappeared. And when you overlay the gender of the people that work in nannying, au pairing, domestic cleaning, domestic caring, overwhelmingly women, here's another example of how we've disadvantaged them from health and safety protections. Now it gets really complicated. I mentioned earlier that, do we call it gender? Do we call it sex? Is it gender identity? What's the right language to use here? And we have to be really, really careful and specific. The right language of most of the things I've talked about is sex, because you are biologically man or biologically woman. There is some tiny, tiny percentage where it is difficult to decide biologically which you are. But broadly speaking, you're biologically male or biologically female. But in this modern world, we don't like using the word sex because it sounds a little bit end of the pier, salacious. So we've used the word gender. Well, gender is much more about how you identify rather than what you biologically are. And it leads to all sorts of challenges. Now, this time that image is there to talk to you about toilet provision. And I'm sure we all know there is a very prescriptive level for the number of wash basins, number of urinals, number of cubicles. But let's ignore that prescriptive provision for a moment and just think about our experience. When you go to the theatre or you go to an airport, where is the queue? It's outside the ladies' loo. It is never outside the men's loo. Well, you have to think about, what do ladies use the washroom for and what do the men use the washroom for? And ladies, predominantly because of their caring responsibility, use it for taking dependent elders into the loo, and that takes longer. Taking children into the loo, that takes longer. Attending to their feminine hygiene needs takes longer. So absolutely, we should have worked out that time in a female toilet is longer per person than time in a male loo. So we should have more female facilities than male facilities to try and mitigate for the extra time. What do? Architects do not like the asymmetry of different sized loos. So you have 4 cubicles male, 4 cubicles in the female washroom, but the men also get 3 or 4 urinals, and both lots get only 4 hand wash basins. So consequently, 8 consecutive user male don't wash their hands, and 4 consecutive women users have got to create a queue, because what are the other 4 doing? If you want to really test this out, go to the South Bank in London, where they created gender neutral toilets. And conceptually, this is a really good idea, because everything is shared and there will be equal pressure on the male loos and the female loos, or what were traditionally the male and female loos. What happened in reality was women patrons of the South Bank said, I don't want to walk into a washroom where there are urinals. So very quickly, the gender neutral toilets were badged gender neutral toilet with urinals and gender neutral toilets without urinals, which is the same as calling them men and women. So consequently, all of the women continued to use the women toilets. Men continued to use the male toilets, but because they were gender neutral, some men used the women's toilets. So therefore, the burden on washrooms for women got worse as an unintended side effect of providing gender neutral loos. So if somebody in your diversity and inclusion team or somebody in HR comes up with the concept of gender neutral, and please do a Google search on South Bank, have a look at how badly administered gender neutral toilets can impact your organisation. What you should do instead is think about a bio-psycho-social model that looks at people in the round rather than are they biologically male or biologically female. Unfortunately, we've grown up in the UK believing being gender neutral is non-discriminatory and therefore is a good thing. Actually, what we need to do is re-examine our safety management systems and be gender sensitive. Otherwise, you will always have size 3 mouse, the same shoes for men and women, because same shoes for men and women is equitable. You will only have one high-vis vest, and it is XXL, because you need some XXL high-vis vests. You won't have any smalls because we're being gender neutral. Well, that's ludicrous, and you wouldn't dream of doing that. So let's look at the aspects of our SMS that apply to a woman's chemistry, a woman's physical biology, and a woman's psychosocial needs. And we'll turn now, have a little look at psychosocial needs. These are slightly text-heavy slides because this starts to introduce some really complex theories. So I merrily talked to you earlier about you're born biologically male or born biologically female. You can make an identity which should be called gender and say, I identify as a. Well, actually, amongst all of that is some traits that are sex related, not gender related, but we don't like using the word sex. So some people have a high masculine trait, and broadly speaking, they're men, but there are some women with high masculine traits, and we'll have all come across those women in our professional careers. They tend to be in the C-suite because they are, inverted commas, successful. But equally, there are a whole bunch of people that have high feminine trait, and they tend to be sexed women, but they may also be sexed male. So Laura gave a very short history of my CV. I'd welcome any of you to hunt me down on LinkedIn and connect on LinkedIn if we're not LinkedIn already. And you'll see that my career started in nursing in the NHS. So almost by default, in a caring role, I must have high feminine trait. I must, because I have good emotionality, I'm very nurturing, I give priority to relationships, and by professional training, I'm a caregiver. However, it's only a trait. So here in our wonderful masculine organisation, they reward me for being technically competent. I have to have some assertiveness. I have to use rational skills. I have to protect the whole organisation, both organisationally and individually. So I'm shifting my preference to masculinity rather than femininity in this area. Why does it matter? It matters because of the way you approach stress in the workplace. If you look at stress, there is very little evidence of difference between man and woman and the way they experience acute stress, short-term stress. There's really good evidence that there is a difference in long-term stressors, chronic stressors, and this tends to be due to role overload. So caring, nurturing, naturally passive, high feminine trait people, so not necessarily men or women particularly now, are more likely to have role overload because they're competing to demonstrate masculine traits against their personal preference. And they're going home and having to operate a household, elder care support, the whole range of second shift issues. And all of those stressors release a set of hormones which are nearly always, we'll talk about fight or flight in a minute, but are nearly always geared towards how we give a response. And 3 of those key stress hormones are found higher after work in women than they are in men. Because a man goes home to their wonderful break from work, relax, go to the man cave, watch TV. There are a whole range of restorative actions people who are sexed men or have high masculine trait will do, while the person in the household with the higher feminine trait is racing around doing the washing and the cleaning and the cooking and making sure that the man who is having his restorative period is being cared for. Cared for. So very packed slide here. We need to think about the experience of stress, and stress is on a continuum between distress, which is not good, and a concept called eustress, and eustress is positive. So I perform better approaching a deadline than I do with just deliver this piece of work. Well, that sort of positive stress is called eustress. You need to think about the masculine nature of your organization. So on the left-hand side, there are some things that represent a masculine organization. So you avoid soft things. You always demonstrate power, strength, competitiveness. It's wrong to cry in a board meeting if it's not going well. Well, why is it wrong to show your emotions? But it just is wrong. And people with high masculine trait are rewarded at work for taking risks, going for it, facing into danger, being brave. These people are all out on the frontier. They're our thought leaders. They're our blue sky thinkers. Well, actually, they're just people demonstrating and aligning themselves to the masculine trait of the organisation. Do all women do that? And have a think in your next mixed meeting, if we have returned to face-to-face meetings, and have a look who stays behind to clear up the coffee cups, put the chairs under the table. Who was the first person you either turned to and suggested they took the notes in the meeting, or worse, actually offered to take the notes in the meeting? And I wager right now it's likely to have been a woman. And the rest of this slide, and we'll share the slides with you afterwards, and you'll be able to see them in the recording anyway, just give you a reminder of the 3 stages of stress management. We always leap, because it's easy, you just pay money, to the tertiary interventions, the stuff we do or external parties normally do to our individuals. Well, actually, why are we fixing people and then putting them back into danger? So it'd be great to examine the primary prevention strategies, the things that change your organisation, how you restructure your organisational thinking to make it a less stressful, for both genders, of course, make it a less stressful experience. There is no way on this earth, in any other part of the world, you would just fix the person and then return them to the dangerous situation. So I took somebody from Chernobyl, I put them somewhere that wasn't radioactive, we reduced their body's radioactivity, and then we just sent them back to Chernobyl. You would not just send them back to Chernobyl, and lo and behold, I don't know how far on we are from that disaster, 40 years, that's some great big long time. We still have not returned people there. But every week we're returning people to organisations that damage them. And I think that is quite incredible. I'm going to leave the stress conversation on this concept of fight or flight. You have probably in your organisations designed your resilience building around fighting or fleeing strategies. And this makes complete sense. We are pre-programmed, those of us with high masculine trait, to fight or flee. So a saber-toothed tiger walks into the room right now. My choices are kill it or run away. Now that makes complete sense, and it's made sense to us since the Neanderthal world. Replace the saber-toothed tiger with a stressor at work, and I can't punch my line manager because HR would have something to say about it and my career might end. And I can't actually walk out because HR might have something to say about it and my career might end. So fight or flight is limited as a modern day coping strategy. But we've softened that, and we've softened that down to assertiveness skills training, diary management, because managing your diary is actually quite a fight oriented, let's get organized type resilience builder. But actually fight or flight is very male. So in the Neanderthal world, saber-toothed tiger comes along, you either kill it or you run away. Man, because you were out on the savannah hunting and this happened to you, so you had a very reactive decision. A much more feminine trait is called tend or befriend. And tend or befriend is collect the children around you, stick them in the back of the cave, sacrifice yourself before the kids, so that they can continue the species in a nutshell. And it's very ordered to women. There is a great, although it is now 25 years old, there is a great example of tending or befriending. And if you read the press at the time, it actually uses fight or flight. And the person involved says, I just had a fight or flight reaction. And there was a nursery nurse in Wolverhampton who was with her 3-year-old children about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just before the end of school. They were out on the field at the school having a teddy bear's picnic. And a severely psychotic chap with a machete who had a very strong belief that the children were reporting him to the, remember they're 3, were reporting him to the police, leapt over the very low school fence and proceeded to use the machete and seriously injured a number of the children. And the nursery nurse, a lady called Lisa Potts, was subsequently awarded the George Medal for her actions. She hid 2 children under her skirt. A number of the other children ran towards her and she put her arms out in a protective way to shield them from a man called Horrocks Campbell. Horrocks came up to Lisa Potts, hacked at the children and hacked at her, very nearly severed one arm and seriously scarred a number of children. Luckily, nobody died. He also injured a couple of parents who were there waiting to collect them. A male parent gave chase, so he took a fight reaction and chased him off into a block of flats. The police subsequently arrested him. Horrocks remains 25 years on, detained at Her Majesty's pleasure in a psychiatric hospital. Lisa gave a press interview who said, I just had a fight or flight reaction. Well, I've just spent 2 minutes saying to you, actually, you hide the kids at the back of the cave and you stay in front and sacrifice yourself first. Lisa put 2 children under her skirt and collected 3 or 4 and put her arms around and was prepared to sacrifice her arms. She absolutely had a tend, care or befriend, talk to, make allegiances, club together relationship. Why is that important for us? What do we do organisationally in spending our money in resilience training? We do assertiveness training, diary management, etc., etc. What do we do around increasing social skills, tending or befriending skills? How many of us have gone into the board and said, I need £50,000 to develop our talking around the water cooler training to allow our high feminine trait people to cope with stress more? Normally, in this presentation, that generates a titter because you wouldn't dream of going into the board saying, I would like to get our women workers to chat more around the water cooler. Well, why not? The science absolutely supports it. If you think I've rattled on for 40 minutes and it is just Lorenzo's strange evangelistic approach to women workers, there is an amazing amount of literature out there, not purely centred on stress and gender. Remember, gender really means sex. We just don't like saying it in Britain. Thank you to the Victorians for doing that to us. It's about physical and chemical protection for women workers as well. My email address, my phone number is on there. You can get both of those things from LinkedIn anyway. And I hope, if nothing, I've generated the opportunity for some conversation now where you either challenge some of the things I've said, or actually we've got a reflection that says, I'd like to revisit my SMS and think about introducing gender sensitivity because neutrality is disadvantageous to women. Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed presenting to you. Laura, I'd like to open it to the floor for a discussion.
Wow. I mean, that was really, really fascinating stuff, Lorenzo. Like I said, I've heard you speak about this on a couple of occasions, and every time it kind of blows my mind a little bit more. So thank you very much for taking us through that. We're going to do some Q&A, some roundtable discussions here. So if anybody does have questions, challenges, Lorenzo is very open to a challenge on this stuff. You can either put a question into the chat or you can put your hand up, and I'll come to you and we'll get that conversation going. I had a couple of questions myself, Lorenzo, as you were kind of going through that. We obviously talked about the physical differences between the genders. We're talking about when it comes to fat soluble chemicals and things like that. Women do have a higher fat ratio as a rule. Where does it stop though with these differences? Because obviously that's not just a gender thing. The biggest difference is gender, but then if we're saying, well, we should have the right sort of chemical levels for women and for men, what about then very, very tall women? What about very, very overweight men? So where does that stop? How do we deal with that?
You're absolutely right, and that's a question to everybody really. But in absolute truth, and now we've got health and safety management at the individual level rather than purely based on sex, on the individual sex of the worker. Yeah, we absolutely should give consideration to the hugely, I don't know what hugely means either, but the hugely overweight male, because he will be retaining fat soluble toxins for longer than his skinny female counterpart. So while it's easy to present you at the population level the difference between men and women body fat range, actually we should be thinking about those outliers in both male and female groups. Absolutely right. And we do that in a lot of areas already. If you think about respiratory protection, if you haven't got a you must be clean shaven rule, we change the respiratory protection for the guy with the beard, or the guy who insists on having stubble and you can't get a policy past the union on making them clean shaven. So we'll put, I don't know, Airstream helmets on individuals. So why don't we have the research that underpins different exposure limits for different fat percentages, which we don't have at the moment. But once we've created that as an industry, why don't we have, but this is where it gets challenging, hey, you're a fatty, therefore we need to put you in the extra fat protection group. And that opens all sorts of difficult HR conversations about singling people out, because Absolutely. You can guarantee there'll be a fat male who's a fat male because of some medical condition, and then we're being discriminatory because of a disability. So none of this is easy, but it's about time we moved from the one size fits all mantra, because we're missing some people.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense to me. I think it's just it can feel a little bit overwhelming because there are so many different sort of facets to this conversation. I think Edward, you put your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to raise?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Lorenzo, thank you very much for that presentation. That is very thought-provoking. So in the company I work for, we're doing a lot at the moment around inclusion and diversity, and we've made a lot of progress, but a long way to go. I find it's easy to get the buy-in from the leadership, but as you come further down that management structure to the people actually organising, doing the work, funding the PPE, that it starts to drop off the table a little bit. Is that something that you've experienced? Because clearly you are well versed in this topic, so you must have a huge amount of experience on it and how to get not get around it, but how to overcome those hurdles.
You're 100%. You're absolutely right. And in an industry where 98% of the frontline workers are blokes, and there's only 2% who are women, it's a real hard sell, because there's no scale to having a range of female PPE, for example. But you just have to go back, and I don't know if there's a concept for this, but you need to go back to Safety 101 and be truly grounded. And I regularly use, because most first line managers get this, the idea of respiratory protection being tailored. I know there's only one woman in your bus depot, but why is she wearing male shoes? Or why is she wearing trainers to walk across the yard because she hasn't put her safety shoes on? And then and I know you guys and ladies do this anyway, but then you do the whole, she could be your mother, daughter, sister, wife speech. But it's really hard, because very busy, hard pressed, less educated, probably first line manager has never thought of this before, and you've given him another job. And I say him deliberately. There are very few female managers until you get up to the board in Arriva. The board is 50-50, but in a depot, a woman is probably going to be the cleaner, if I'm being entirely honest. And we've got a long way to go. But how are we going to get more women frontline employees if we're not thinking about their whole health and safety journey? The boys have probably got the toilet quite close to the canteen. The girls have probably got an outhouse somewhere miles away, because the depot was built 150 years ago in the Victorian era, when there were no lady workers. So we've got a long way to go as well.